DFS. It is Friday, December 24th here in Draft Shark Studios in Rochester, New York. Welcome to our Week 16 DraftKings podcast. I'm your host, Matt Schauf. With me, as always, is Jared Smola, and this podcast is sponsored by our partners at FanShare Sports. FanShare curates hundreds of pieces of daily fantasy sports-related articles, tweets, and podcasts to create the most accurate ownership projections in the industry. Those projections can be found in the lineup generator on DraftSharks.com, and you can find up-to-date ownership info anytime at fansharesports.com. Jared, we got a special holiday weekend of football, 2 more games on Saturday, hopefully none on Monday and Tuesday, although we've still got fresh COVID positives coming in, even including some notable players just before we started this one.
Well, there will be a game on Monday night, hopefully. That we usually get that, but yeah, hopefully no other games later. The island games are always fun. I think it makes our jobs a bit more complicated, but I like being able to watch as many games as possible. But yeah, Gabriel Davis joins Cole Beasley on the COVID list. So Josh Allen down 2 of his top 4 wide receivers. I think we'll get into that game a little bit on this podcast.
Yeah, honestly, it's a game that I wasn't really planning to talk about a whole lot, but I think it got a little bit more interesting given the COVID situations there. But we'll start at the usual spot. We'll go to QB for cash. Jared, on DraftKings, who do you like?
Yeah, so Justin Fields would have been tempting here at $5,200, but he didn't practice on Thursday with an ankle. So, unless he's like full go today and not on the injury report, I'm probably going to stay away from him, especially in cash. I'm going to play Jalen Hurts probably at $6,400. It's actually tied for Hurts' cheapest price of the season, and he's $900 cheaper than he was when he faced the Giants just a few weeks ago. Obviously dudded in that first game against the Giants, one of, if not his worst games of the season. But that was only Hurts' second game this season with fewer than 16.7 DraftKings points. He's topped 21 DraftKings points in 9 of 13 games this season. He's just been good for fantasy. Again, he's underpriced here, I think. I'm not worried about the Giants' pass defense. They've struggled the past few weeks now, and their run defense is bad. So I think Hurts at minimum is going to have a big game on the ground. Even in that first meeting, when the Eagles offense, Hurts turned it over 3 times. They disappointed, but even in that game, Hurts had 77 rushing yards. So again, I just think he's underpriced here.
Yeah, I certainly can't fault going Jalen Hurts. My primary quarterback across formats here, though, is going to be Joe Burrow at $5,900. He's been over 17 DK points in 3 straight games before last week's dud at Denver. And we'll talk about the Broncos defense a little bit later. But before that game, too, he had 22. He was over 22 DK points in 2 straight before that Denver meeting. Of course, the biggest game of the year for Burrow came in that first meeting with Baltimore, who he gets again this week. And the Ravens are even worse now than they were at that point. They're down to 29th in pass defense DVOA. It's a pass funnel matchup here. The Bengals have kind of gone back and forth with which way they lean on offense, but we have at least seen them lean pass at times this year. So we know it's a possibility. This is a matchup that says that they should. And even though Joe Mixon looks like the ankle isn't as big an issue as we thought it was going to be entering the week, he's got to be somewhere short of 100%. So I got to figure that can only further motivate what should be a pass-heavy approach for Cincinnati in this one. So I like Joe Burrow's safety. And then transitioning to the GPP side, Joe Burrow is going to be my favorite for tournament lineups as well. I think that prime matchups for Justin Herbert, Matthew Stafford, plus the attractive profiles of Jalen Hurts, Tyler Huntley, some other guys. I think all that's going to help keep Joe Burrow's rostered rate down from where it probably should be, given his price and his matchup. He has multiple stacking options, which we all know at this point, but Jamar Chase is 7,100, so not exorbitant. T. Higgins is still nicely priced at 6,200. Tyler Boyd, I'm less interested in, but 5,100, he's an option. And then CJ Uzomah at 3K, a good option for tight end, can give you the double tight end stack if you want to run back. Mark Andrews on the other side at 7K. So I like the options that come with Burrow, along with just the upside that he presents.
Yeah, almost too many stacking options. So I'm going to end up having to make, 3-4 Burrow teams, I think. But he is my favorite tournament play for all the reasons you mentioned. The Bengals did go 59% pass in neutral situations in that first meeting with Baltimore. That was 7th highest on that week. It was, up 8 percentage points from their average on the season. So that, they did play to the matchup and go pass heavy. I expect the same this week. I almost wish Burrow was a bit more expensive to maybe keep the ownership down a bit. He's at his cheapest price since week 3. So I'm with you. He's, my second favorite play in cash. He's my favorite play in tournaments. I'm also going to play Justin Herbert in tournaments, as I've been doing most of the season. The Chargers, easily the highest implied total on the main slate at 28.25. As you said, they get that Texans matchup. So Herbert has, I think, the highest ceiling on the main slate. And then I'm also going to play Matt Stafford in tournaments at $6,700. It was kind of disappointing last time out in that, funky Tuesday game against a divisional opponent. Those games, can always tend to disappoint, I think. But I like this spot here against the Vikings. Minnesota 29th in plays against, so they've been giving up a lot of plays. The Rams are first in situation neutral pay, so I think there's a chance you get a big play volume out of the Rams here. The Vikings are 28th in adjusted fantasy points allowed to quarterbacks. And I don't know how much to weigh this, but the last time Sean McVay's offense faced Mike Zimmer's defense, it was back in 2018. The Rams scored 38 points, and Jared Goff threw for 465 yards and 5 touchdowns. Obviously different teams, but that's Jared Goff, and now we have Matt Stafford. So that's a taste of the upside you might have here with Stafford in this matchup.
It's certainly also worth noting that Minnesota's run D has had 2 good outings among the past 3 games. So it could be a matchup that favors the Rams throwing the ball a little bit more than they might otherwise. So yeah, no arguments against Stafford and his upside here. And of course, I'm sure we'll talk about his wideouts as we get to that position. Running back, though, for cash, Jared, is Justin Jackson at $4,200 a must if Austin Eckler is still on the COVID list for this game?
He's not for me. I think, last week, he would have been. But to me, there are 5 strong cash game plays at running back this week. Justin Jackson's one of them. I think Alexander Mattison, James Robinson, David Montgomery, and Ronald Jones, along with Justin Jackson, are viable cash plays. So for me, this is a week where you sort of build out the rest of your lineup. And we'll get to wide receiver. Wide receiver, to me, there's not many strong cash plays. So, I think you wait to fill your running back spots till the end based on what you have available salary cap wise. I think, to me, James Robinson and David Montgomery, factoring in price and safety and volume, are kind of my 2 favorite plays at running back for cash.
Yeah, David Montgomery at 5,700 is not far behind Jackson in our DK dollars per point projections, despite a $1,500 difference in salary, 17 plus carries in 3 of his past 4 games. And more importantly, for our full PPR scoring here, 22 targets and 19 catches over the past 3 games for Montgomery. So I like him at Seattle, no matter who's playing quarterback for the Bears in this game. And I agree that he's a primary cash option. I also agree that there's so much going on here that you don't need Justin Jackson at 4,200. Certainly the fact that he's facing Houston. And I saw Austin Eckler on the Yahoo Fantasy Football cast saying that people need to go pick up Justin Jackson. So that at least gives us another nod toward him being the lead running back there if Eckler is not playing in this game.
Yeah, for sure. And I'll definitely be mixing Justin Jackson into my tournament teams for sure. I don't know if I'll go away from those 5 running backs even in tournaments. I mean, we'll see how the ownership shakes out. I do think Sony Michel at 5,500, like in different weeks, he'd be in play for cash. I think he's a good value. We saw him play 73% of the snaps last week, even with Darrell Henderson back, 18 carries and 2 targets for Michel. So, he's a guy where if he's coming in at 5% ownership because everyone's flocking to those other cash plays we've talked about, I think Michel will be someone worth mixing into tournament lineups.
Yeah, certainly worth considering. There's lots to like in that 5K range that we've alluded to. Ronald Jones is down there as well. James Robinson, you mentioned. Miles Sanders, we'll see about his health, but he's coming off a terrific game and going against that weak run D that you talked about for the Giants. Clyde Edwards-Helaire jumps out to me at $5,800, likely to go lower owned, I think, than other guys in that price range. But he's coming off last week, not a high touch count, but a season high in snap total, his largest snap share since the opener, a season high in targets. So if the Chiefs lose either Travis Kelce or Tyreek Hill for this game, and of course they're both still on the COVID list as we speak, I mean, that can only raise Clyde Edwards-Helaire's profile in the offense. And even if both of those guys came back, then we'd be talking about a full strength Chiefs offense giving more scoring opportunities to everybody. So I don't think there's a scenario that makes CEH a bad play this week. The matchup just adds to it. The Steelers have been awful in run defense. Last week marked the first time since week 9 that they held an opponent without a running back rushing touchdown. The Titans in that game still averaged 4.9 yards per carry. We had a 100-yard game for Deontay Foreman. The past 5 games have included 2 touchdown efforts for Dalvin Cook, Joe Mixon, the 4 touchdown game for Austin Eckler. So a great spot for CEH if the Chiefs are willing to give him the opportunities.
Yeah, definitely. He's another guy I think that would be getting more attention if this was a different week. So there's so many strong running back plays this week that some of these guys are going to get kind of left behind. And I think those are the interesting tournament plays. We'll see how the ownership shakes out.
Wide receiver for cash. There's a spotlight on Antonio Brown at 4,900. The Chiefs 3K wideouts if Tyreek Hill remains out for this game. What do you like for cash though?
Yeah, I mean the 2 guys I know I'm going to be using are Antonio Brown, and honestly, I mean there's some risk here. I mean the guy hasn't played since I think week 6, but to me that's mostly negated by the price tag at $4,900. Brown already averaged 8.4 targets in his 5 games this season, and those came with Chris Godwin and Mike Evans. So I think you're looking at a guy who could see 10 plus targets from Tom Brady. Carolina's still dead last against number 1 wide receivers according to Football Outsiders. So I think the matchup's fine for Brown too. And then I'm going to play Cooper Kupp. I mean, he's $9,100, but he's just been money all season, and he gets the Vikings, who are dead last in adjusted points allowed to wide receivers. And again, being able to play those 5K running backs, even Justin Jackson, if you want, it's pretty easy to get Kupp into cash lineups.
Yeah, with those top priced running backs missing from this slate, I think Cooper Kupp pops as the biggie that you almost have to play, maybe across formats, but especially in cash here because he's shown his ceiling. He's shown that the floor is not all that far from the ceiling this season, and there's enough value at the other positions to fit him in fairly easily. I do think that McCole Hardman, Byron Pringle, 3,500, 3,300 respectively, are in the mix here as well. You mentioned the risk on Antonio Brown. I do think there is real risk. It's also worth noting that the matchup isn't awesome. I mean, it's not scary, but Carolina has been a negative scoring matchup for wide receivers. So yep. Antonio Brown could be fine physically and could still have just an okay game here. So those guys offer some more salary savings if you do want to pay up a little bit more for a running back or a tight end that we'll get to in a few minutes. But, all those guys certainly in the mix as we make our cash lineup plans. GPP, I kind of like looking at the other Rams wide receivers besides Cooper Kupp here. I'm not going to say that I'm fading Cooper Kupp, but it gets interesting to look at Odell Beckham for 5,300. His numbers stunk last week, but the playing time was there. Van Jefferson's targets have been down the past 2 weeks, but his playing time is still there. And both of those guys in mid 5K range. And we already talked about the matchup. The Vikings are allowing more wide receiver fantasy points than any other defense.
Yeah, I both those guys here too. They both just feel underpriced to me, especially Odell Beckham at 5,300. Disappointed last week, but we've already seen 2 19 plus DraftKings points games out of him with the Rams. So like that call, I think if you're using Matt Stafford, you stack Cooper Kupp and one of these wide receivers with him. Last guy I have here is T. Higgins, who you talked about with Joe Burrow. He's my favorite stack with Burrow. Still, the price difference. I mean, Higgins at this point should probably be more expensive than Jamar Chase, but he's still significantly cheaper. Leads the Bengals with 35 targets over the last 5 games. Had 3 straight 100-yard games before last week. The entire Bengals offense just kind of disappointed last week. So I'm going to write that off. Going to expect them to bounce back in this spot. And Higgins had 15 targets in the first game against Baltimore. He disappointed. I remember that game. He struggled. He had a few drops, caught just 7 of them for 62 yards. But, if we can get anywhere close to 15 targets out of Higgins on Sunday at this price tag, it's going to be a big profit.
I think every time that the lines for Higgins and Chase are about to cross in the graph, Chase just has like one of those 2 touchdown games. It's like, oh, all right, we're going to go ahead and spike his price back up. But yeah, I agree that they should at least be close, and they certainly help Joe Burrow to be interesting. I think one other guy is Tyler Johnson at $3,900, a potential pivot off of Antonio Brown, who is probably going to be extremely highly owned in tournaments here. $1,000 cheaper. Obviously Antonio Brown is in a great position coming back with Chris Godwin out, with Mike Evans probably out, but also hasn't played since week 6. So I think that he is more worth trusting to rebound immediately than most guys in that situation, but it's still somebody returning to the NFL for the first time in 10 weeks. So there's a chance that he's not all the way there. So Tyler Johnson, I think, presents some upside, basically for the same reason. There's targets available for whoever happens to get them and who's open on a given play. Tight end for cash. Jared, it looks to me like there's an inordinate number of low-cost options this week. What do you like?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a gross slate. There are plenty of cheap options. You don't feel great about any of them. Mark Andrews has been priced way up, so I think he's tough to play in cash. I'm going to go with Jared Cook in cash at $3,500. He has 4+ targets in 5 straight games. He has 5+ targets in 4 of those 5 games. He's averaging 5.2 targets over the last 5. And I think he probably gets at least a slight boost from that on Sunday, assuming Austin Eckler's out. We know Donald Parham is going to be out with his concussion. Parham's averaged 2.8 targets over his last 6 healthy games. So, if Cook can even just pick up those or half of those, and the matchup's good for Cook too. Houston dead last in Football Outsiders tight end coverage rankings. They're 29th in adjusted points allowed to tight ends.
Yeah, I mean, the risk is low volume here, but that's baked into a $3,500 salary. If he lets us down at $3,500 in cash, it's certainly not a killer. So I like Jared Cook the best too for that combo of situation and ceiling. Cole Kmet is interesting at 3,300. Might be the best target bet in that range of 3K guys. 10th among all tight ends in targets for the season. 7th in targets per game over the past 5 weeks. So he's in the mix as well. $200 cheaper than Jared Cook. Noah Gray is interesting at $2,500 if Travis Kelce doesn't make it back from the COVID list. We did just get Blake Bell back from the COVID list. So, maybe that challenges things. I have no idea how they're going to divvy playing time and targets between those guys. But at 2,500, minimum price, you're basically hoping for a guy to do anything. And playing with Patrick Mahomes, even though it hasn't been the same as previous seasons, that's still one of the best places to be if you're just hoping to steal a touchdown.
Yeah, I have Gray here as a tournament play. Neither Gray nor Bell have been playing much, but the past few weeks, Gray has been running more pass routes than Blake Bell. So I do think he'll be the primary pass catcher. Gray's a 5th-round rookie, decent college production, not a great athlete. He's kind of undersized. There was some buzz on Gray this summer, though. Sounds like he had a good training camp. So I do think he will be the primary pass catching tight end if Kelce is out on Sunday. Otherwise, for tournaments, I'm just going to stack my tight end with my quarterback. Like on Herbert teams, I'm going to play Jared Cook. My Burrow teams, I'm going to play CJ Uzomah. On my Stafford teams, I'm going to play, the Rams tight end that I can't name anymore. And just, kind of hope that the big game from the quarterback carries the tight end along with him.
You should just call him Voldemort. Then everybody will know what you're talking about.
Perfect.
Yeah, if you're not playing Mark Andrews in a tournament lineup, I think, it's the same myriad options that you mentioned. I love the ceiling on Jared Cook. I don't need Justin Herbert in my lineup to play him. I will play Mark Andrews and CJ Uzomah in the same Joe Burrow lineup because then I can get that 3K flex guy in Uzomah and pay up somewhere else to kind of make up for what I might be giving up at that position. Yeah, that's all I got for tight end. So we'll move on to defense. And the Bengals sit at the top of our DK dollars per point at $2,800, a potential starting point here against the Ravens. Mm-hmm. But I prefer the Broncos at 2,800 here, Jared, against the Raiders. The Raiders have not scored a lot. They've scored 16 points or fewer in 6 of 7 games since the bye. That, of course, is also the span since they lost Henry Ruggs. And Warren Sharp pointed out on Twitter, it was either yesterday or this morning, but the Broncos defense has actually been stingy starting in week 8. One of their past 7 opponents has exceeded the Vegas projected point total. Just 1 out of 7 has done that. And that was the Eagles, and they got a defensive touchdown in that one. So without that, Philly even would have been close to that projected point total. Collectively, the group averaged 16.6 points against the Broncos in those games. That same group of teams in their very next game has averaged 38.5 points. So Denver is stopping offenses from doing what they want to do, and the Raiders are having trouble doing what they want to do, even without a good defense on the other side.
Yeah, I just pulled up the updated lines, and Denver now road favorites in that game in Vegas by a half point. But, it's got a 41-point over-under. I do think it's going to be a low-scoring game. So that makes sense. I do think the Bengals are in play, too. As you said, they are our top dollars per point value at defense. They're 3-point home favorites against the Ravens. It looks like it's going to be Tyler Huntley again at quarterback for Baltimore. But, I think more importantly, the Ravens have allowed a league high 48 sacks. That includes 5 sacks in their first meeting with the Bengals. And Cincinnati is quietly tied for 3rd in the NFL with 40 sacks. So I just think they're a pretty safe floor play here for cash.
Yeah, I like them as well. And I don't even really see much of a need to go above that because I don't see overly attractive defenses. What about you? You got any other targets here?
Philly is attractive against the Giants. You got to pay $3,600 for them. I won't get to them in cash, but I'll try to get up there in tournaments. Otherwise, if you want to go a bit cheaper than the Bengals and the Broncos, you have the Jets and Jags at 2,700 who play each other. Neither defense is good, but both offenses suck. So there's some upside there. And then I might consider the Falcons even at 2,400. It looks like it's going to be Tim Boyle again at quarterback for the Lions. So there's upside to the Falcons, even though they're not a good defense either.
Yeah, I like the Falcons best among those options. The Jaguars not only already bad on defense, but also just lost their top pass rusher, Josh Allen, to the COVID list this morning. So some ugly stuff down there. I think I'm going to try to stay at the 2,800 level unless I need that $400 and go down to the Falcons. That's going to do it for this week 16 DraftKings podcast. Head over to draftsharks.com to get more player recommendations. If you're a DS insider, you can check out Jared's cash game picks as well as top GPP options from Corey Bushland. You can also mess around with the lineup generator to build your own lineups with the help of the DS projections and fan share ownership projections. For more discussion of DFS and other formats, you can join the free Draft Sharks Discord. Find the link to do that in the description for this podcast. If you're with us on the stream right now, stick around. We're going to take a small break and then fire up the FanDuel podcast. For Jared Small and the rest of the Draft Sharks crew, I'm Matt Schaff saying thanks so much for swimming with us. It is Friday, December 24th here in Draft Shark Studios in Rochester, New York. Welcome to our Week 16 FanDuel podcast. I'm your host, Matt Schaff. With me, as always, Jared Smola. And this podcast is sponsored by our partners at FanShare Sports. FanShare curates hundreds of pieces of daily fantasy sports-related articles, tweets, and podcasts to create the most accurate ownership projections in the industry. Those projections can be found in the lineup generator on draftsharks.com, and you can find up-to-date ownership info anytime at fansharesports.com. Jared, for QB in cash, I'm going to be doing something similar here as to what I'm doing on DraftKings. What do you like for cash QB on FanDuel?
Yeah, I'm going in the same direction here with Jalen Hurts. Just 9.8 FanDuel points in the first meeting with the Giants. That was one of only 2 games this season that he failed to score at least 16.7 FanDuel points. Hurts really struggled as a passer in that game. But the Giants, over the last 3 games since that Philly meeting, have allowed a 74% completion rate, 6 touchdowns versus 0 interceptions. So I'm not worried about the passing matchup here for Hurts. And I think more importantly, it's a great matchup on the ground. Football Outsiders has the Giants 28th in run defense. Hurts ran for 77 yards against them in the first meeting. So I just think he brings, because of that rushing ability, he brings a pretty high floor, especially at this $7,700 price tag.
Yeah, I was concerned about Jalen Hurts heading into that Washington game, and then he ran right over any of those concerns with a good passing night, a good running night. So yeah, no argument with him here. The only argument, I guess, a slight argument, is that Joe Burrow at $7,100 comes in $600 cheaper than Jalen Hurts, $400 cheaper than Tyler Huntley, $800 cheaper than Matthew Stafford. So he's going to, again, be my primary quarterback on FanDuel this week. The Ravens are the 3rd best QB scoring matchup by our adjusted fantasy points allowed. They've allowed 7 touchdown passes over just the past 3 weeks to Aaron Rodgers, who had 3 of them, 2 to Baker Mayfield, 2 to Ben Roethlisberger. Burrow, of course, threw for 416 and 3 touchdowns in the first meeting. That game was the 3rd 400-yard game that Baltimore has allowed this season. And all of that came before they lost top corner Marlon Humphrey to injury for the year. So the matchup is great. Burrow has been decently productive lately outside of last week's game against Denver, which is playing well on defense right now. And the stacking options are obvious here, either for cash or tournament play. We know the Bengals receivers. You can check their prices and see what fits in your particular lineup. But the run back options, Mark Andrews sits number 2 in our FanDuel dollars per point projections this week, even at $8,000, and that's well ahead of everybody else at the position. So put all that together with the price for Joe Burrow, upside. It's tough for me to like any other quarterback as much as him on this slate.
Yeah, I love Burrow. I lean Hurts in cash just because of that rushing. I think it gives him a slightly higher floor. But I think Burrow beats him in ceiling this week. Burrow's my favorite tournament quarterback. So for all the reasons you mentioned, I'm also going to play Justin Herbert in tournaments. I like Matt Stafford, as we talked about on the DraftKings show. We should mention Tyler Huntley too. We just removed Lamar Jackson from our projections, added Tyler Huntley in. It looks like he's going to get another start for the Ravens on the other side of that Bengals game. The guy just scored 35.9 FanDuel points. There's not many quarterbacks on this slate with that type of upside, maybe none. I'm curious to see what his ownership comes in at, after that massive game, but I do think he's definitely in play. I mean, you could, play Huntley naked and then, run back one or two of the Bengals wide receivers and sort of stack the game that way.
Yeah, I agree with all that. I also like Jalen Hurts on the GPP side, Justin Herbert as well. I think Justin Fields, if he's ready to play, gets interesting in tournaments. He would be in play for cash at 7K if there weren't the ankle question, but as it is, he'll have the upside if he's active for this game. Over to running back for cash. Justin Jackson was, he has a spotlight on him on DK this week because of his low salary, but on FanDuel, he's right with Alexander Mattison and Ronald Jones in salary. So I think it's a lot easier to avoid Justin Jackson over here, especially in cash. What do you think?
Yeah, I won't be playing Jackson in cash here. I do think it makes him a much better tournament play on FanDuel. Like I think Jackson comes in, I don't know, like 5% owned here just because, it's going to be tough for people to play him over Alexander Mattison for sure. And then Ronald Jones is the same price. So I like Jackson for tournaments. I mean, Alexander Mattison is just a lock for cash on FanDuel, $5,500. He's our top ranked running back on this slate because we have only Jonathan Taylor ahead of him. And, he's playing on Saturday. So, Mattison, 34, 32, and 25 opportunities in the 3 games without Dalvin Cook this season. So he's going to get fed. I like Ronald Jones for cash here on FanDuel. He's relatively cheaper here than he is on DraftKings. He's $5,400 on FanDuel. Even is a better fit here too, because if there's a question with Jones, it's just how much he's going to do in the passing game. I think he could lose some of that work to Keyshawn Vaughn and or Le'Veon Bell. And then my third guy for FanDuel here is going to be David Montgomery. He's $6,600, 16.5 carries and 6.3 targets over his last 4 games now. So he's just getting workhorse usage, has a good matchup against the Seahawks, who are 31st in adjusted points allowed to running backs.
I agree with all that, except for there just being one question about Ronald Jones. If there were only one question, we probably would have seen him before now. But yeah, I agree with him being in the mix here. And I have Dave Montgomery down as well. The price, his price is excellent. It probably doesn't look as good as it is because of the influx of 5K guys this week, but it certainly fits easily. And I think probably more attractive than he seems when you first look at the FD dollars per point in the lineup generator this week. So switching over to GPP, I want to like James Robinson this week, but at $8,200 on FanDuel, I think he's too expensive to be truly attractive. He's certainly still in the mix. I'm not saying I'm fading him, but we're coming off a game where James Robinson worked out against Houston, but it's not like he had a terrific outing. He had 18 carries, he had 6 targets, and he came away with only 75 rushing yards, 3 catches for 13 yards, 1 touchdown. So, a solid outing, and the matchup this week against the Jets is at least as good, but he's not a lock for sure at that $8,200. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think he's probably slightly overpriced there. Maybe he should be in the mid to high 7s, but when you compare him to these other guys, he's way overpriced. So, he's an ownership play because I do think he's going to come in low owned because of that price and the other guys available. I mean, if you give me 18 carries and 6 targets though against the Jets, he's an awesome play in a vacuum. And he might get even more work this week because the Jags just placed Laviska Shenault on the COVID list. He's averaged 6.5 targets over the past 5 games. He's been seeing a few carries as well. So, some of that could go to Robinson. So he's a, pay up to be contrarian play on FanDuel. As I said, I like Justin Jackson on FanDuel for tournaments. He's going to be much lower owned here because of the price tags relative to some of the other running backs. And then I'm sort of in wait and see mode with this Eagles backfield. We talked about the matchup against the Giants. The Giants 28th in Football Outsiders run defense DVOA. The Eagles 3rd in run offense DVOA. So it's just a mismatch here. We'll see about Miles Sanders with the quad injury. I think there's a chance he's just getting rest early in the week, with them coming off the Tuesday game, but we'll have a better idea of Sanders' status on Friday afternoon. If he's out, I think Jordan Howard becomes the play at $5,700. I do think we'd see Boston Scott mix in, probably Kenneth Gainwell too, but I do think Howard would be the best bet for carries in Philly.
Yeah, I mean, for what it's worth, Mike Garafolo was interviewing Miles Sanders right after that game, and he didn't leave the game with the injury. They pulled him because it was done late, and they were resting him some, and he certainly didn't seem worried during the post-game interview. So we'll see. It's a good spot for him if he's good to go. I think we'll still get pretty high James Robinson ownership, even at 8,200, just because you can fit him into lineups this week. It's not like he's 9K plus, but we'll see. I'll be curious to see how high his level is. A couple other guys that I like. Cordero Patterson, 7,200. He's $1,000 cheaper than James Robinson, also in a terrific matchup against Detroit. And I think he's going to be sneakier than usual coming off a bad week last week, which was in a reasonable spot to have a bad week. San Francisco's second in run defense DVOA on the season. So, I mean, if your running back's going to struggle, San Francisco is a reasonable matchup for that to happen. We don't like the dip in receiving for Patterson, but he did see 5 targets in 2 straight games before last week where he didn't have much receiving there either. And then Javonte Williams at 6,300 against the Raiders, 4th in our FanDuel dollars per point rankings. Vegas is the 3rd best scoring matchup by our adjusted fantasy points allowed. I don't think that there's much of a chance of Denver falling behind in this one unless we get a bunch of Drew Lock turnovers. And frankly, the possibility of Drew Lock turnovers is another reason to expect Denver to keep it on the ground as much as possible and give plenty of volume to both running backs.
Yeah, and Williams is kind of pulled away from Gordon as far as passing game usage goes. I mean, you still don't want Denver to fall behind if you're going to get a ceiling game out of Javonte Williams. But even if they do, it seems like he'd be the guy on the field more in comeback mode.
Mm-hmm. Anybody else among tournament running backs?
Nope.
Wide receiver for cash. I mean, we talked about him on DK. Is Cooper Kupp a must, even though he's all the way up at $9,800?
Yeah, I think so. Again, because you can get, if you want to get 3 running backs in the 5Ks, you can. Even if you're going to pay up for Montgomery at 6,600, it's easy to get Kupp in. He gets the Vikings, who are dead last in adjusted points allowed to wide receiver. So I'd be scared to head into Sunday's games without Kupp and cash at least.
I would too. And I mean, even at 9,800, Cooper Kupp is still 3rd in our FanDuel dollars per point projections. He's behind T. Higgins, Deontay Johnson. The cheap running backs make it easy to fit him. T. Higgins's price makes it easier to fit him. We have Mecole Hardman down at $5,200, Byron Pringle down there as well. So there are other options to help you fit a $9,800 receiver if it's difficult. And of course, I already mentioned I like the cheap quarterback, so that helps as well. Keenan Allen, 7,700 against Houston is another attractive one. I would rather try to fit Keenan Allen into a Cooper Kupp lineup than Deontay Johnson at 7,400 against Kansas City, because I prefer Keenan Allen's matchup. But, both of those guys I think can be in play.
And I prefer Keenan Allen's quarterback too. So that's why I like him over Deontay Johnson. So that would be my second guy in cash, Keenan Allen. Double-digit targets in 6 of his last 7 games. He had 8 targets in the other game. He's averaging 10.9 over that span. Gets the Texans matchup. I think Antonio Brown is appropriately priced here at 7,000. Probably going to shy away from him in cash, just in his first game in like 2 months, and go down to T. Higgins instead at $6,500. Averaging a solid 7 targets over his last 5 games. We expect Cincinnati's passing volume to be up in this game against Baltimore. So I think Higgins is a good target back, good talent for the price tag.
I agree. I don't think Antonio Brown is a bad play, but I'm going to be fading him in cash because there is some risk. We mentioned it. He's been limited this week. They say he looks good with the ankle, but he is limited in practice, hasn't played in 10 weeks. And the Carolina matchup is negative, slightly negative by our adjusted fantasy points allowed, but still negative. So he's not a shoe-in for production. And even if you don't need the salary savings, Jamar Chase is only $100 more. I think he has a higher ceiling than Brown this week. Tyler Lockett's $300 more. Plenty of other guys sprinkled around, including T. Higgins, who you just mentioned. On GPP side, Jared, there's so many options at various salaries here. I think the tougher part than picking out somebody to like is narrowing it down to who I'm going to use. So I'm going to primarily be going, I think, by game correlations here and just seeing what I need to fit salary wise against what else is going in my lineup.
Yeah, it definitely makes sense. A few guys I want to highlight though, Jamar Chase, who you just mentioned, $7,100, and he's $600 more expensive than T. Higgins. I definitely think Higgins is the better pure value, but Chase still feels like the upside guy. I mean, he's still the downfield guy for this offense. He had 201 yards and a score in the first meeting against Baltimore. Baltimore has particularly struggled defending deep passes. So I think you could see Chase catch a long 1 or 2 on Sunday. Odell Beckham, I like at $6,600. Hopefully people are off him after he disappointed on Tuesday night against Seattle. But he has 16 plus FanDuel points in 2 of his last 3 games before last week. Plenty of upside again in this matchup against the Vikings, who are the worst wide receiver defense. And then I got to play DK Metcalf again. He has 8 plus targets in 5 of his last 6 games now. He has a 48% catch rate over that span. I mean, he and Russ just can't get on the same page. I mean, to put that in perspective, Metcalf had a 64% catch rate last season. So, I'm just going to keep betting on those two, hooking up, getting back on the same page one of these weeks. There's obviously nothing scary about the Bears matchup on Sunday.
Yeah, you got to be careful talking about DK Metcalf hooking up. I want to throw out Stephon Diggs at 7,500. I think he gets interesting with Cole Beasley and Gabriel Davis out on the COVID list now. It's still a bad matchup for everybody in the Buffalo passing game, but Stephon Diggs, the player, is good enough to beat matchups. So he can perform in a bad matchup. He could see 15 targets in this game. Now, I'm not saying that's my projection, but that's now well within his range of possible outcomes. And in this meeting last year, the second meeting with the Pats last year, he scored 3 times. Now, this year's Patriots defense is much better than last year's was overall, but 2 of his 3 touchdowns in that game came against JC Jackson in coverage, according to Pro Football Focus. That's who's going to be in primary coverage on him this year. That's who's in the Pro Bowl as one of the best corners in the league. So, it's just an example of Diggs being able to beat the matchup. We know that Josh Allen's not afraid to take shots, even if Stephon Diggs is covered. So I'm not playing him in cash, but a tournament lineup, I can see tossing Stephon Diggs in there. Not with Josh Allen, but, if I have room for a $50 receiver.
Yeah, I love that call. Emmanuel Sanders is expected back this week, but he sort of tailed off in the second half of the season. I think, his old man legs have sort of failed him here. Isaiah McKenzie's not going to see a whole lot of volume if he's their, Beasley replacement in the slot. So I could definitely see a huge target game for Diggs. And as you said, he's capable of winning any matchup.
Now you just locked in 9 targets for Isaiah McKenzie, Jared. Thanks very much.
Yeah.
Tight end for cash. I mean, it's really either Mark Andrews at 8K or a cheap guy, right?
I actually have Rob Gronkowski here, who's, kind of priced in the middle. Just a target bet again, with Mike Evans and Chris Godwin. I mean, Gronk's already averaging 8.3 targets in his 8 healthy games this season. So I don't see a reason why he shouldn't get to 8. And I think, 10 to 12 is within range. It's not a plus matchup, but, it's not a matchup that we have to run away with. Carolina 12th in adjusted points allowed to tight ends.
Yeah, I can certainly understand the argument for him. 8 to 10 targets in this game would be nice. If I knew that he was getting that going in, I would say that he's fine at 6,700. I agree with you on the matchup. It's negative, but it's not scary. The Panthers are 7th in tight end coverage DVOA, according to Football Outsiders. They're in the bottom half of adjusted fantasy points allowed to the position. I could just see this being a sluggish passing day overall for the Bucs, and Gronk not really paying off, but I'm not calling him a terrible play. I think I would rather try to get the 1,300 extra and go up to Mark Andrews for a higher ceiling, or just go down to the 5K range, where my favorite is Jared Cook at $5,100. Houston has allowed the 7th most FanDuel points to tight ends. They're 4th in our adjusted fantasy points allowed to the position. So I like the ceiling on him. The floor is less attractive than it is for Gronk, but I think the matchup kind of balances that out, of course, along with the salary savings.
And I think the other guy people are going to look to is Dallas Goddard, who I definitely think is in play. $5,900 is a nice price for him. He's coming off 2 big games, 25.5 and 17 FanDuel points. To me, that there's still some George Kittle to Dallas Goddard, where we saw it last night with Kittle. He can have 2 or 3 target games because of the low volume, passing game in Philadelphia. And Goddard actually did see only 3 targets in that first game against the Giants. So, I have no issue with him in cash, but I would rather go to a guy I think is a safer bet to see good value.
Yeah, I'd rather go down to the cheaper guys than settle on Dallas Goedert or Kyle Pitts at that $5,900 price. Either could pay off for you, but we could get a good Philly offensive game and still not get many targets for Dallas Goedert. I think probably the ideal day for the Eagles is throwing 20 passes. And I mean, you can get a quarter of that and still have a quiet receiving day. So I'd rather just go down to the cheaper guys who, similar bets for targets at that level. On the GPP side, I do think Dallas Goedert, Kyle Pitts are in the mix here. I think Mark Andrews is certainly in the mix. Jared Cook, CJ Uzomah are probably my favorites, and CJ Uzomah especially in a Joe Burrow or a Tyler Huntley lineup here.
Yeah, I agree with all those guys. I have Cook, Uzomah, and I have Kyle Pitts here. I think I'm ready to go back to Kyle Pitts at $5,900 against the Lions. The Falcons have the 6th highest implied total on the main slate. And man, Kyle Pitts, he has 1 touchdown on 58 catches this season. That's a 1.7% touchdown rate. Average is like 8 to 9%. So man, he is due for some touchdowns. He's averaging 6.7 targets, 4.3 catches, and 62 yards over his last 3 games. So, if he does that and scores once or twice over the last 3 games, we're talking about, Pitts finishing the season hot. Detroit 19th in adjusted points allowed to tight ends. They're 22nd in Football Outsiders tight end coverage ranking. So I'm going to I'm going to, hope Pitts has one big game here to close out the season.
Mm-hmm. On defense, I like the Broncos at $3,800 over the Bengals at $3,500, and mostly because I think there's a better chance that the Ravens don't pay off this matchup than the Raiders don't pay off the matchup with Denver. Baltimore has topped 20 points in each of the past 2 games with Tyler Huntley in there. He's only taken 4 sacks over those past 2 games and thrown 0 picks. And I mean, last week was Green Bay, which is a better defense than Cincinnati. So there's still upside to them, but there's also, I think, more downside. So I'm going to lean Broncos to get the Raiders. The Raiders have scored 16 points or fewer in 6 of their past 7 games. That's since the bye. That's the stretch without Henry Ruggs. The Broncos have also been stifling opponents over that same span. Since week 8, the 7 opponents that have faced them in that time have averaged 16.6 points against Denver. They've averaged 38.5 points the following week, according to Warren Sharp. So Denver's doing its thing on defense right now.
Yeah, they are. So I do think Denver and Cincinnati are your 2 best cheap plays in cash. Cheap tournament play, I think Atlanta is in play, against Detroit, assuming it's going to be Tim Boyle again at quarterback. Just to remind you, Tim Boyle completed 56% of his passes in college, averaged 5.6 yards per attempt, 12 touchdowns versus 26 interceptions in college. So it's a good matchup for Atlanta. Also on the tournament side, I think Tampa is the expensive defense. I would go up to their $4,700. They're going to get some combination of Cam Newton and Sam Darnold, the quarterback for Carolina. The Panthers have the second lowest implied total on the main slate. And I think the Patriots are interesting too now, at home versus this Bills offense without 2 of its top 4 wide receivers. They placed lineman Cody Ford on the COVID list too, so he's going to be out for Sunday's game. And we know Josh Allen, for as good as he can be, he does take sacks, he does turn the ball over. And New England is just 4,100 on FanDuel.
Yeah, I like that one. I like the Bucks. I think the Eagles are in play at 5,000 against Jake Fromm. But maybe the Giants are better with Jake Fromm than they were with Mike Glennon. So if there's salary left, the Eagles are in play. I'm certainly not going to make myself get to a 5K defense, though, just to play them.
Yeah, plenty of good cheap plays for tournaments, especially this week.
That's going to do it for this Week 16 FanDuel podcast. Head over to DraftSharks.com now to get more player recommendations. Kevin English has your cash game picks. Corey Bushland has your top GPP options. And then play with the lineup generator to build your own lineups with the help of the DS projections and FanShare ownership projections. For more discussion of DFS and all your other fantasy formats, you can also join the free Draft Sharks Discord. Find the link to do that in the description for this podcast, wherever you might be taking it in. For Jared Smola and the rest of the Draft Sharks crew, I'm Matt Schaff saying thanks so much for swimming with us.